Harden wanted out of Houston. He wanted to go to Brooklyn to play with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. Well, he got what he wanted this week. Harden, part of a massive 4-team deal, leaving the Western Conference and coming east. The Nets introducing their newest player today, who brings with him a pretty decent resume. His coach has a pretty decent resume, too. Steve Nash talking about his guy. New on SportsCenter.
We're excited. We obviously got one of the premier players in the world, so it's always tough to say goodbye to guys that you develop a relationship with, you feel strongly about. But going forward, we got very, very unique talent, incredible firepower. You could go down the line and talk about all the things he does with the basketball and brings to a team. So we're thrilled to have James and give our team a boost, but also obviously give us a lot more talent.
So 3 stars, but there's only one basketball. So just how will Harden, Durant, and Irving share the ball at the end of games? Nets fans should be happy knowing that they have 3 very dependable options. Over the last 10 seasons, all 3 of them rank in the top 4 of usage rate in clutch time. That means the last 5 minutes of the game with the score within 5 points. And as soon as James sits down, we'll bring you that on SportsCenter.
Following this breaking news on SportsCenter, Kyrie Irving is eligible to play when the Nets face the Magic on Saturday after being fined $50,000 for violating the NBA's health and safety protocols. He was apparently ordered to take part in a 5-day quarantine earlier this week. Sources telling Adrian Wojnarowski that he's allowed to return to the team and their activities on Saturday if he continues to test negative for COVID. New on SportsCenter, here's head coach Steve Nash on Kyrie's status.
Whenever James is ready, he will start immediately. I have no update on Kyrie timetable, so I couldn't answer that one. But we have to go through all the protocols and physicals and all the different sections of this. First of all, we have the physicals on the one side, and then we have the COVID protocols. So I don't have an update on Kai, but whenever they're both healthy and ready to go, they will start.
So you haven't seen the league's update on Kyrie Irving that he will be eligible to end his quarantine and rejoin the team activities tomorrow?
I have seen that, but I'm just saying I don't have an update on when he'll be back. So.
Got it. Thank you.
Available to the Rockets in the deal was Ben Simmons. If you wanted to look at whether they would keep him or look at his trade value, and I do think that's a part of it for the Rockets, even bringing in Victor Oladipo, is what might his trade value be, because they could move him again before the trade deadline. But I think ultimately, this deal with Brooklyn got them, the multiple first-round picks and the pick swaps. I think essentially Houston's betting by perhaps the back end of this that the Nets could be a team that's not as good, and those pick swaps would benefit Houston. But ultimately, listen, I always thought it was going to be a little difficult for Philadelphia to get a deal done if things were relatively even. Daryl Morey left the Rockets, went to Philadelphia, and I think owner Tillman Fertitta ultimately, the idea of not only allowing Morey to leave, but then to send him James Harden and to see James Harden have great success with the Sixers and with Daryl Morey, that was going to be something that, all things being equal, I don't know if the Rockets wanted it to play out that way.
Well, now that he's on the move, Woj, with all the protocols and all the different things, and once the deal is finalized, when will we see him in an Nets uniform?
I mean, it's conceivable he could play Saturday, Keyshawn. There's no, the way the protocols are, as long as he's been testing positive and he tests every day, and he's been in this league protocol, once all the players report and pass their physicals, it's conceivable he could suit up on Saturday against Orlando, although part of it depends on passing their physicals and all becoming eligible to play with their new teams.
Well, you and I both know managing those personalities is going to be extremely challenging, especially for a first-year head coach in Steve Nash. With that being said, how important is Mike D'Antoni to this team now?
Yeah, Mike D'Antoni's history, certainly with James Harden specifically, and I know D'Antoni was a big proponent of bringing James Harden in. I think he thought that they would find a way to make it work. He loved coaching James Harden because he knew he'd show up every night to play. He didn't want nights off. He didn't want minute restrictions. And James Harden loves to ball, and he brings that to this Nets team. And certainly there's going to have to be sacrifice among these three. You can't listen. Even with two great players, someone's got to give. But there's no Chris Bosh in this big three, and that's going to be a challenge for the Nets. It's hard to imagine who's going to be the player that's going to take a significant back seat. With three, someone's going to have to. That's just reality. But listen, I think part of this trade, too, Jay, and I think you know this, is it's a bit of an insurance policy for the Nets, for Kevin Durant. They want to be able to re-sign him on his next deal. They've seen him return at an all-world level, and he is the focal point of this franchise. He was from the beginning of that free agent score and bringing in he and Kyrie Irving. It was always about getting Kevin Durant. And now, without really knowing what the future holds for Kyrie Irving and them and what his commitment's going to be, whether they can really count on him, I think they have solidified Durant's future by having James Harden. And I think Kyrie Irving is going to have to figure out how he fits into that now.
Well, what is the internal feeling at this given juncture on Kyrie Irving at the Nets?
Well, I think Kyrie is going to have to explain. He's going to have to explain really what's transpired here in the last week. And I think that, listen, ultimately, as much as anything, and you guys know this in professional sports, teams have to be able to count on you. And if there's issues, if there are things that they need to help Kyrie Irving work through, like any organization with a great player, they're going to be there to do that. But ultimately, they've got to know you're seriously you have seriously committed to this endeavor and this group and this team. Kyrie Irving has to be a leader on this team. He's got to be a leader for good. And I think for the Nets, they have to know that. But listen, bringing James Harden in changes that dynamic. And this is a team now that has, three MVP level players on it. And I do think that perhaps the organization gained a little leverage now over Kyrie and over his future by landing James Harden.
It's very interesting. The point you made about who's got to acquiesce, I think that is the most fascinating point of all. And if you want to go even deeper on this story, and it is the biggest story in sports this morning, Woj has got you covered. Emergency podcast with the sirens blaring on your phone. He's breaking it down. It's already taped, and you can listen to it right now. That's Woj on the Goodyear Highline. Adrian, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
All right, bud.
And of course,
thanks, Woj.
Woj brought to you by... he's on the Goodyear Hotline, brought to you by Goodyear. Okay, so one thing I want to mention here, NBA and ESPN Radio tonight as well. Butler and the Heat, Embiid and the Sixers, key second question there with regards to how close the Sixers were. The best asset they could pass on was Ben Simmons, so we'll see how the Sixers move on after maybe being the one team that was jilted. Again, Heat Sixers tonight, presented by Indeed, covered 7 Eastern on most of these ESPN radio stations. So now we have to flip the script because... at this time yesterday, because the deal wasn't done, and again, it's not officially done, but let's talk about it like it's done for all practical purposes, the entire Eastern Conference, Jay, revolved around Giannis. 2-time MVP. He was also the Defensive Player of the Year, top seed, trying to win their first championship in 50 years, got the Supermax. Let's build around him. What do you want? We go from all of that, the entire axis of the Eastern Conference revolving around Giannis. By the way, now the planets are revolving around another team, how quickly it can change.
Yeah, and I actually think, Milwaukee's been playing really good basketball as of late, won 3 games in a row. I will say that the Bogdan Bogdanović deal that didn't go through, where he ended up going to another team, to the Atlanta Hawks, I think ultimately could hinder this team from getting out of the East. Now, look, there's always going to be that question, how does Giannis handle things down the stretch as far as making big shots? Can Drew Holiday, can Chris Middleton, can those guys be the clutch players that Milwaukee needs? I still think they will be there, but the Nets will be by far the favorite in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, by far. It's not. I mean, they're bringing in Harden. You get Kyrie back, and I didn't think that they were far off without James Harden. I felt like that the Nets would probably be the team to come out of the East in the first place. But now the question begs of what's going to go through Giannis's mind when, in fact, he looks up at the end of the season and they're not in a position to make a strong run for a championship, or they get bounced in the playoffs early. What clicks to his mind when he's now signed a long-term extension? They went out there and got a player for him. And so Drew Holiday is now in the mix. What happens? Where does his mind go? Should he have not signed the extension? Should I have waited? Should I have looked to go to another team with more players because people aren't going to come here in free agency?
We'll dig into it further. Go ahead, Jay.
I just want to explain to people, who, and I understand everybody has to be quote unquote professional, but just because you sign a 5-year deal does not mean that you have a 5-year commitment to one team. You have a 5-year commitment to the money that you signed for. I just want to specify, this is a new age. We've seen Kawhi Leonard get out of a situation. We've seen Anthony Davis get out of a situation. We've now seen James Harden get out of a situation. We will continue to have conversations about people like Bradley Beal, who is in Washington, who there have been stuff about, could he be a Laker? Could he force his way out of Washington? And I said it the moment it happened. Just because Giannis signed a 5-year deal with Milwaukee to be the highest paid player in North American sports does not mean that he will be with Milwaukee for 5 years if their front office and team cannot put him in a position to win a world championship. That is the reality of where we are in today's NBA, where player empowerment, players can get to where they want to be.
Yeah, but though everybody that we talk about in player empowerment and signing supermax deals or long-term extensions, they don't ask to be out after one season. That one season would be a bit much. You got to kind of, if he was to go walk in there after this season and be like, yo, I don't want to deal with this. I don't want this anymore. You just signed a max deal, man, like 7 months ago. Like, what the hell are you talking about? Now, if he did it 2.5 years from now, I think that.
So, Keith, what if 2 years they don't get out of the Eastern semifinals?
Yes, but down the frustration, 2 years. Yeah, the frustration, 2 years. But not after one season.
Yeah, I never said one season.
No, I'm just saying, not after. I wanted to make it clear, and you were not talking about after one season. You're talking about down the line. Down the line, of course. But after 1 year, 2 years, it would probably be a PR nightmare for him, considering that he said what he said about wanting to be, this is my home, this is my town, I want to be here. And then you look up, 24 months later, and you're talking about you want to get out.
There's no doubt about it. And Jay made up the most interesting point of all. You're right. It's the age of player empowerment. Just a reminder that as of yesterday, the Houston Rockets controlled James Harden's rights for the next 2 years. 24 hours later, that whole thing blew up. Very interesting point there by Jay. And probably, as Jay said, it's the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the biggest names in basketball. If they want out, as Keyshawn has said, in any sport, if they want out, eventually they'll get out.